Michael,
Hey, Mike, how are you doing? Good to see you,
good.
buddy.
Good to see you too. Now we've got Jim joining us.
Yeah, Jim Lyon should be on shortly. So he's the general director of all of Church of God. So he's like the head honcho of the whole movement,
Yeah,
you know. So yeah, so I was just back in Anderson. I think I've mentioned it to you. I've been a part of this Project Imagine Roundtable, trying to
yeah,
figure out how to be able to kind of for a new day, new era, do ministry in this better joined up way for our kind of dysfunctional ways that we've done things oftentimes. And so I've been at that table with him, and so we really got some good breakthrough. We've got this pilot region, is what we're calling it. I'll be a part of that, where we're trying to get these different geographic regions to work together and cross our racial and lingual lines as well, and work in greater unity from the very beginning. And as we sat down, there were other regional pastors. We sat down with Jim, and he was, we said, how do you want us to do this? What are you thinking? What's in your heart already? And I was really intrigued. He took us back to St. Ignatius, and he said, really, like, I've been reading a little bit about St. Ignatius and how he had this society of Jesus. He
yeah,
said, before you guys do programs and plans, all that will be great. I wonder if there's a way for you guys to live as a society of Jesus and let programs and I went, what the heck? Oh my goodness. And so I asked him out of that, I said, hey, could I set up a call with you and Mike Breen? Because there's a lot in this awakening huddle that I'm in and just other training. And then I think from your experience in particular, and I mean, this is probably a super broad sweep of your life, but just the things that you went through from Brixton to Sheffield to the US and how you were just learning intuitively along the way. I'm watching him do that stuff, man. It's beautiful to watch. He's bringing so much life to our movement. So
yeah, yeah. Well, I'll be glad to talk about all that, of course. Yeah,
yeah,
I think that probably it's the key to a sustained model of missional movement.
yeah.
Now there he is.
Yay! There's the man, Jim. Good to see you. See, I can't hear you yet.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah, we are.
Oh,
Hang on, I've just got my wife calling me. She's at the doctor's. I'll be with you in a second.
No
okay,
sweat.
no problem. I was just giving Mike a little bit of a lowdown, kind of how the call and the invitation came up. So I explained a little bit about Project Imagine, because I think I've told him about it before, and then our conversation in your office. So, and said, hey, I just thought this would be great to get you guys together. So.
Even after you told him about it, he was agreed to talk.
Oh, Jim.
Oh, Michael.
Hey, by the way, now that I've been in your office and I've seen some of your older pictures in there, and then Becky let me know that there's a picture of you with an afro. I feel like I need to see that picture, because people that I hold near and dear to my heart, and you're one of those people, I take like those types of pictures and I put them in my phone for the contact information, so that every time I get a text or a call from them, it reminds me of this different era from their life. And so,
Yeah. Well, I've got a baby picture. It's really better than the afro.
no way, no, not that one.
If you really want a different era.
Oh man.
Yeah, I used to have a lot of hair, and it was all frizzed up.
Really? Yeah. I couldn't even picture it. I mean, I saw one of your, it was, you were pretty young. I don't know what age it was from, but on one of your desks over there. And I thought, this is great. I may have even tried to snap a picture of that picture, but I don't want to be too creepy.
I maybe told you the story that we have a wedding picture. I was 26 when I got married, and I was in the pro business then, and I had big Elton John glasses because my wife got me to wear contacts, cut my hair, but all that to say, we had some people at our house. In this wedding picture, she was out, and this person asked Maureen and said to Maureen, we didn't realize you've been married before. And she said, no, I've not been married before. And they said, well, who's that guy in the picture?
Oh, that is so good. Like, I don't know if I can prove this or not, but like, this is my worship director. It's probably going to be way too small, but like, that's him in this big band era. Like, I mean, he's got like, I mean, his hair goes up to here. And so I got that one in here because every time he sends a text message and I see that, I just like, I love that. That's that, extra story of life before, so.
Hey, I'm totally different. Speaking of your staff, I don't know if you've had any contact with David Wynn, but his daughter is in the children's ministry business.
Okay.
And she and her husband, they have a little child. They live in Indiana. She's been doing youth ministry work, but she's very open to children's work, loves that.
Okay. Nice. That's great.
And she's very familiar with California. That's her home place.
Okay.
So it could be worth a check.
Great. Good.
Okay, sorry about that. Sally had to go do some tests at a doctor's, and so everything's fine.
Yeah, good report. Well, Jim Lyon, this is Mike Breen. Mike Breen, this is Jim Lyon.
Hey, Mike.
And so I feel pretty excited because, in a sense, I mean, you two have had, significant impacts in my life. And so this is I feel a little jittery in a sense, like, oh my goodness, these two guys are powerhouses are together here. And so.
And maybe we'll disclose who you really are.
Nice. I love it. That's good. Yeah. Well, I was catching up Mike on the call before, Jim, like I mentioned, just giving him a little bit of context of kind of how the invitation came up. And then I had talked with you about it. I think just to double back on it as a reminder, once you had brought up the Society of Jesus, because you shocked me a little bit when we came back and said, as regional pastors, what do we do to submit to your leadership? What vision do you have? How can we partner with you? You said, okay, this is my summary of it. What if we put off on plans and programs for right now, let that come up in due season, and focused in, and you couched it with the book and St. Ignatius and what if we developed the Society of Jesus together? Because all the plans and programs could flow out of that. And I went, oh my goodness, I can't believe you're really saying this. This is, we use the language of family on mission. That's what Kimberly and I would say. We're living as a family on mission. And I've got all that language from Mike Breen and watching and emulating what they're doing. And they really, it's amazing to be able to see. Was the big aha, the poke and the prod, and to realize that Mike and Sally and Joe and Chris Saxton really had this depth of familial relationship that was extended spiritual family that was deep and broad. And then as I got in contact with a wider 3DM family, that's the bigger stuff that I realized. And I think that's what has been the gravitational pull, ultimately calling me in deeper, in a sense, to relationship that way. So I just felt like there was a lot that Mike potentially could speak to. And then in a sense, Jim, you guys are both, leaders of international movements. And so you guys are significant, players in the wider field. And so I just feel like, man, good sparks can come from whatever might happen in this connection that way. So that's kind of the stuff in my mind and heart to see what happens there. And so I do have a couple of questions that I, put out, but you guys are geniuses and know how to be able to figure out how to navigate forward in the conversation.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure about all of the epithets that you're attaching to me, but I'm more than happy to have the conversation.
Thank you. I should say to Mike Breen that I was introduced to your name and content and actually your voice online about 5 years ago when I came to my post here at Church of God Ministries. Previously, I had not been introduced to 3DM or any of that.
Yeah.
That said, I was immediately taken by it. I'm sure that it has seeded my thinking, even subliminally, if that makes sense. I've read some of the books and so on and so forth. I met Michael and some other people who have been touched by 3DM. Right. And all of that has made me a fan and certainly has informed my sense of where church life needs to go. That all said, so glad to have a chance to talk with you directly. Wow, that's a lot for us. But I'm Michael, if you want to seed the conversation with some of your questions, having understood both sides of this conversational equation, bridge it with some questions that you would pose that Mike can speak into. Let me hear. Let me just listen.
Sure.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think, I brought up, so as you brought up Society of Jesus, I said, whoa, John Wesley's done this stuff. Yeah. And in a sense, though I've got these Wesleyan roots, Mike Breen is the guy that probably awoken me to those Wesleyan roots even more. Because as I began to first hear about, ultimately what would be like an expression of family on mission, a lot of what Mike was doing with these predictable patterns, with his missional purpose, living as spiritual parents, a lot of it just came from he spoke to different audiences and he was couching it in Wesleyan terms. And so I thought, whoa, there's no pushback in any of our circles from that. They would be completely wholeheartedly embraced. But then beyond theory and concept, Mike has labored to build this stuff. Even, one of the recent statements would be, like as we travel and as we go through the life and do different things, sometimes, what we build falls apart. But if we're people who can dig wells wherever we go, that's the kind of people we can encounter and overcome anything. And so I've watched and listened a lot to Mike's story, that he's just a guy that can dig wells wherever he goes. And the well that he's going to dig into is going to be this well that spiritual family like that is going to form and flow from. And so I think maybe the question, Mike, that you could address is, I was thinking Brixton, Sheffield, US. That's a broad sweep of your life. But there are things that you've learned. You used to do things differently, and then you changed things, and now it feels like it's a much more easily reproducible what you've done and how you've developed a society of Jesus or done things in this Wesleyan way that reproduces itself again and again. So could you speak to that?
Sure. And it's great to be chatting to you guys. The ecclesiological history of the Church of God is holiness and Wesleyan, is it?
Yes, indeed.
And emerged out of the Second Great Awakening, particularly, or the Third?
Well, 1870s, 1880. Are you familiar with Weinbrennerian?
No.
Well, came from there. But anyway, 1870s, 1880 is the official kind of mark date.
Right. So post-Civil War,
Yes, absolutely.
all the stuff that's moving towards the Third Great Awakening,
Yes.
and camp meetings and all of that stuff.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. Okay. I just need to be able to place myself within the landscape.
Right.
So assumption.
So the Free Methodists, the Salvation Army, the Church of the Nazarene, the Church of God, the Wesleyan Church, we're all kissing cousins who actually developed approximately the same time. The Nazarenes are a little bit later, but it's all the same stew.
Yeah. That's great. So, Wesley, what a fascinating and wonderful enigma he was. He set on. I'm going to just put up a whiteboard here, if I may. He kind of rediscovered some things that I think were enormously important. And one of the things that I think he discovered was how we can function in continuum rather than in categories. So the way I see much of the missional conversation as it is right now is we have a kind of organized and organic conversation that appears to place people in separate categories. And very often what we have over here is institutional, and then we have informal. And then, if you press it a little bit, it starts to look more like attractional and missional. And of course, the real problem about that is that these are not categories, but really representations of a continuum. So every institutional church has got informal components to it, and every organic structure has got organization within it. There's no
pure expression of either.
There's no pure expression of any of it. And the people who think that there is are either kind of living in some kind of desired world that they've created for themselves, or they're just simply mistaken, I think, in their understanding. The way that I see that, the way that I see that functioning with the early church is that the early church had oikos, or household, and this is on the day of Pentecost, of course, and temple. So in Acts 2:46 and following, not Acts 2:42, which of course everybody remembers, but Acts 2:46 and following describes their daily experience. And their daily experience is oikos and temple. Now, the interesting thing about that, of course, is that when you say look at Paul and you go to Acts 20:20, his is not temple, but the hall of Tyrannus, and he just calls it public and from house to house. He says, you've seen my ministry. I'm not withdrawn from sharing anything with you that would be helpful. And you've seen it in public, it's hall of Tyrannus in Ephesus, and from oikos to oikos. So the continuum, where persecution is not present, the continuum is very active. Where persecution begins to become more and more evident, you tend to migrate away from public, simply because persecution just forces you in that direction. So that's all very interesting. But of course, what happened after persecution began to diminish was that some of the early fathers began to worry about whether people would really ever be really mature Christians without persecution. I mean, their assumption was, if we've got mature Christians out of persecution, what's going to happen now that we haven't got persecution? And so Anthony, towards the end of the 3rd century, becomes the father of the monastics, the father of Ignatius, the father of Benedict, the father of everybody, by going into the desert and defining what in its worst form is the ascetic life, in its best form is the crucified life. And so what begins to happen is what Rodney Stark, as he defines the church, he says that the church becomes a church of power and piety. It becomes a church which is the formal church and the monastic church, or the institutional church. And the monastic was always family, and the formal was always institution. Now, what Wesley did, of course, I mean, the monastic movement had been gone 200 years by the time he emerged at Oxford with the Holy Club. But the seeds of the monastic movement had continued, particularly with the Moravians. So Jan Hus, and then the Moravians at Herrnhut with Count von Zinzendorf, basically created a monastic life where they prayed for revival for 100 years and got it. And of course we know, Peter Böhler, one of the Moravian missionaries that was invited to England by the Church of England, by the Archbishop of Canterbury. Peter Böhler is reading the introduction to Luther's commentary in Aldersgate Chapel, and of course Wesley gets saved. So what is it then that's the thread? The thread is the kind of the neo-monastic and the kind of formal church, and the way that Wesley worked with that was that he had class, society, and congregation. Yeah? In class and society, basically the class functioned inside the society. So the society was probably more like the oikos, and the society was more like the kind of the mini group within the society as it starts out. So now you've got this continuum that's been rediscovered and reemerges, but we've missed out on one of the most important phases in the history of this continuum, which was when the Roman Church encountered the Celtic Church in Britain.
Oh yeah.
And what happened was the Minster movement, which were large resourcing churches that were built on the Roman model. The Roman model of evangelism is, if you build it, they will come. The Celtic model of evangelism is, if you go, you'll find them. And so they brought these two things together at the Synod of Whitby in about 667, around there. And basically they created this amazing combination of the organic and the organizational. And that was the movement that evangelized all of Europe and created Christendom that we know. So the Christendom that we know in North America was formed by the combination of the Roman and Celtic models, which is why the books about, the Irish saved the world and all of that kind of stuff. Really what that is, it's the Minster movement that has a monastic family that's the missionary family, and a clerical base that's resourcing the mission. That amazing kind of combination was the thing that created it all. So what's happening, I think, in what you're describing is, obviously you have all of this DNA in you, you have all of these seeds in you, and you're beginning to see the Spirit move. And so the Spirit, who is the founder of this continuum, because this is what he downloaded to the church on the day of Pentecost, Acts 2:46. I mean, this is the template, the pattern. I always say to people, why don't you assume that the whole of Acts chapter 2 is what the whole of the church should be like? And if it is, then it should be temple and oikos. And what it sounds like is that the kind of the monastic model that you're identifying here, Jim, is enormously important. Now, in my work, generally what I've done is I've started things that create this core at the center of a church, that allows a church to grow and develop and multiply and proliferate. In Europe, the order of mission is a very kind of vibrant and real kind of reality. In America, it's 3DM, and they function very much like an order, to be honest with you. So what you're saying, I think, about the use of the Society of Jesus is exactly right.
First, let me say, Mike, I drink from this well.
Right.
So thank you. I mean, I've written it all down. Fantastic. I love history. I love your grasp of what I'll call the human dynamic in tension over time. I just have to disclose also, I'm an Irish citizen by birth. So I have a native draw to what you're talking about.
Sure.
Just throw that, how the Irish saved civilization, I'm there.
Yeah, and you may have noticed by my name that I'm Irish ancestry as well. I'm not far from the peat bogs myself.
My father was an IRA man imprisoned by the British at Crumlin Road in Belfast, so I got it.
Well, my grandfather, my great uncle was Daniel Breen.
That sounds so
He was the first guy to kill a British soldier in 1917.
In the uprising. And wow.
Yeah.
Well, all that to say, back to Jesus. But anyway, I thank you. This is so fantastic. My basic, telescope is that our what we call a movement of churches. I think a term that is fairly fanciful in a way, but that's what we call ourselves.
Yeah.
Is thirsting for, it doesn't realize it's thirsting for it, but I mean, it's necessary missing piece is this kind of Society of Jesus or the Wesleyan Holy Club or whatever, so that its leadership can form around something more than the reproduction of what I'll call the organizational models.
Yeah.
And so developing that conversation, developing those relationships in what I would call almost cell groups, or as I've talked to Michael about on the West Coast, a kind of collective, seems to me to be moving forward. And you're hitting it straight on the head, and your capturing of church history is so fascinating. Am I hearing you say that in your best sense, the church is both this oikos and this organization, that you really need both? We're never going to be divorced from the fact of having a fixed meeting place and a kind of order of service.
Yeah.
But it can only thrive in the context of these holy clubs or societies or whatever that actually are family bred. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And so the sustaining fuel or food for the oikos, what do you think that is? How does that live? I mean, it's one thing to imagine we're going to have a fun time. We'll take Michael Guzman and we're going to go on an adventure together. It's going to be really fun for a few months. Then what?
Yeah, the way that I've framed it, basically on quite a lot of reflection, is that a family on mission, which is the kind of the contemporary phrase that we would use to describe an oikos, is formed around spiritual parents, because obviously an oikos requires parents. I mean, you can't have a family without parents. So there has to be spiritual parents. There have to be predictable patterns of life. And there has to be a missional purpose. And the way we shape that is we just use the familiar triangle, and we simply say, the spiritual parents are the ones who give the oversight and direction. The predictable patterns are the means by which you create security. The thing that most people don't realize about the ordered life, holy club, monastic life, whatever it is that security emerges from predictability. But of course, if we asked ourselves, how do children get security? Everybody says, well, they get hugged a lot and all that. Actually, it's not. All of the evidence says that children develop a secure life on the basis of predictable behavior. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there's missional purpose. And of course, in the early church, the oikos was the center of social interaction, was the center of education, was the center of healing, was the center of politics, was the center of commerce. I mean, everything organized itself around the oikos. And so, nobody would even think about whether mission was going to be focused somewhere else. Obviously, mission was going to come out of the oikos. For us, who have lost the extended family unit by and large, and we have this kind of worn down nub of the Western nuclear family, we don't really know how to resource mission out of that size group, because we don't really have it available to us. And so very often what we do is we start thinking about small groups, which are the avatar, the kind of the spiritual avatar of the nuclear family, and have only emerged really since the nuclear family emerged. I mean, that would never have been it. The way I've often put it is, they're small enough to care, but they're not big enough to dare. And so they very rarely, unless you've got, you know, spiritual Navy SEALs in a small group, they very rarely kind of pull up many trees missionally. You need more people than that. Does that make sense, Jim?
Absolutely. No, I'm right with you.
Yeah. So this is what I would call an oikos, or a family on mission.
But you're describing a kind of critical mass necessary in an oikos,
Yeah.
to actually be world changing or kingdom expanding.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so what's that parameter? Or how does that relate to an organized temple?
Well, I think what happens is that sorry about that. It doesn't want to. Everything's frozen up at the moment. I think what happens is that you get something like this. You get an understanding that the church, like all of human society, is made up of 4 types of group. Now, this isn't me, this is Edward Hall, you know, the 20th century anthropologist. But the groups are public space, which is 70 plus, social space, which is the space that extended family fills, which is usually 15 plus to 70. Then there is personal, which is 6 to 12. And then there's intimate, which is 2 to 3. Now, of course, Jesus knew how to use all of these. Yeah?
Oh, it's froze up a bit.
Oh, is it? Have you got it? Yeah. Or is it coming back?
There you go.
There we go. Gotcha. You're good.
So Jesus knew how to use all of these, didn't he? So he has the 3, the 12, the 72, and the 120 plus the 500. Jesus knew how to interact with all of the spaces of human interaction, and he knew how to use all of them. And probably our best reflective tool is just to see how he did that. I mean, what does he do with all of these people, and in what ways are they functioning? But these are like Russian dolls. But Joseph Myers made a very interesting observation in his book, The Search to Belong. He said, the Christian church in the West has all of the spaces except the social space. And the problem about that is that in human behavior and in human community, this is the place where identity is formed. Yeah?
Yeah.
And so it's not surprising that we have a huge deficit of security and identity within the church, because the one space in which that naturally emerges it's just not available to Christians usually.
And that theory is that the dimensions of the social space are the appropriate cradle for identity development.
Exactly.
When you're in the personal space or intimate space, it's just too small, and the public space is too large.
Yeah.
You find your own sense of self in this social 15 to 70 group.
And think about it. If you think about yourself as a kid, if you only had your brothers and sisters and your mum and dad, you don't have anything like the sense of identity that you would have if you have your uncles, your aunts, your grandparents,
My cousins.
and your cousins.
Yep.
Because that's the thing that goes, okay, so I'm not bonkers then. This really is what we're like.
Yes, right. It provides authenticating dimension.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah.
Good.
So in church life, that's really got to be, I mean, that's a critical investment right there.
Honestly, if you never ever did missional community, family on mission, if you never did any of those, and you only did it for that reason, you'd get a much better return.
Yeah.
But obviously, you know, mission is going to grow out of security.
Yeah.
When you talk about spiritual parents, I mean, the oversight, I mean, that's a person, could be 2 people, 3 people, a leader. There has to be something has to be out front and kind of guaranteeing the rest of the legs, right?
Sure. And I would say the minimum number is 2. I think that it's very rare that you have any household that only has one person at the top that has a real. They can have one person that's seen as the authoritative voice, but they're usually surrounded by other people who have a parenting role.
That's good.
Single parents don't work as well as 2.
No.
Yeah. And so, Jim, like you'll hear, you know, in the Project Imagine roundtable, you know, the thing that I've pressed on again and again is I think that if we could settle the question of authority and who has authority to make decisions and to call some shots, I'm speaking spiritual parent language and just trying to frame it in that, like, our autonomy is going to work worse against us because basically we have 1,000 parents all going a different direction and then competing with one another.
1,000 children.
Yes,
That's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and truth be told, even kids will organize in some kind of deferential line, even subliminally, subconsciously, but it's not a very effective model for achieving.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So these dynamics are not options, in my opinion. They always emerge. I mean, throughout history and in every expression of a vibrant missional church, they always kind of come to the surface.
So how would you draw a vibrant missional church in what I'll call a transcendental way that spans cities and continents?
I would probably organize it on the continuum of temple and oikos. And I would probably come up with some way of creating a mechanism by which you can measure the effectiveness of the temple and a mechanism by which you can measure the effectiveness of, you know, what we're calling here family on mission, oikos, the monastic, the holy club, I mean, I think it was Ralph Winters who had modal and sodal. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. It's the same thing as centered set and bounded set. Mm-hmm. You know, there's something that can organize itself around vision, and there's something that can organize itself around membership. And generally, it's by holding those two in tension that you get the greatest level of vibrancy. So what you have to do, I think, Jim, is you have to look at it and just, you're a very dispassionate leader. Obviously, you're able to look at things with a compassionate but critical eye. And you look at it and you say, where's the emphasis right now? Where do we need to put the emphasis? Where do we need to put? Now, you don't put the emphasis there to the exclusion of the other because you're not creating categories, but you're just wanting to expand the continuum. I mean, if the continuum currently is you have public space and a little bit of missional stuff, then you want to expand that so that you can get more people on the continuum and be able to express the church in a broader sense. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, your idea of developing a community of missional leaders, I mean, that's a very legitimate way of going about things.
Well, it would seem to me that, back to whether it be Ignatius or Wesley,
Yeah.
the capacity of either individual was limited, of course, by our human finiteness, but both experienced dramatic expansion of influence and movemental mojo.
Yeah.
As they replicated.
Yeah.
In different places, and I guess I'm just imagining the Church of God in a similar frame. If we can pattern, Michael, a missional community, a Society of Jesus, a holy club,
Yeah.
can that be replicated elsewhere? Yes, but it has to start somewhere with somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And most people have done this. I mean, even Charles Spurgeon did this with his preachers teams that he used to send out.
Sure.
And so it's not kind of captured by any ecclesiology, really.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's never kind of fully expressed by any ecclesiology. This seems to be part of the DNA that the Holy Spirit wants to work into the church.
In our own history that began in 1880, it was seminally launched by a man named Daniel Sidney Warner. Warner died suddenly in 1895. He was 54. He got pneumonia. He didn't believe in doctors, so we don't know really what took him, but he got a fever and was dead 4 days later. That said, while he was alive, he was the kind of engine, the charismatic engine of a lot of stuff.
Right.
Upon his passing, and maybe even during his lifetime, but certainly after his passing, what happened was the Church of God it expanded with what were called missionary homes, but they're essentially monastic families on mission. And they were planted in every city. Seattle, that's my home place where I raised up. The church that I grew up in was the descendant of the original missionary home, where a group of people came and lived communally together in Seattle. And the same thing in Chicago, and the same thing in Portland, and the same thing in Kansas City, and the same thing in Oakland, and the same thing in Denver, blah, blah, blah. It's really this. All of those passed away in the 1920s. A lot of explanation about how they kind of folded, but that was the period of our greatest expansion.
Yeah.
And now that I'm hearing that, again, it just occurred to me that is the same model.
Sure.
They were all replicas of a kind. They each had parents, and they each had a missional purpose, and they each had a predictable pattern. They really did.
Sure. And maybe what's needed then is to shape, according to the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, to shape the 21st century version of that.
Exactly. How does that express today?
Yeah.
Interestingly, I just was at a meeting yesterday with our what we call regional coordinators. These are what we call global strategy staff who help network the church. We're in 95 countries. And I was listening to a report on the church in Birkenhead, which is on the north edge of Liverpool, kind of a desperate place.
I know Birkenhead, yeah, I know Birkenhead, yeah.
Well, it was a missionary home in 1900, which became an engine internationally. People went from the missionary home in New York to Birkenhead, from Birkenhead to India to the empire, kind of thing.
Sure.
If you look at the map of the Church of God today, much of it was, you could just connect the lines between these missionary homes, how they proliferated and took it up. So what language would you use to capture the idea of a missionary home for the 21st century, do you think? Right. How do we translate that into a contemporary idiom? Yeah.
I mean, is it... I mean, the problem about the idea of mission base is it sounds a bit anodyne. It doesn't really have a texture of relationship about it, does it?
No.
So you need to have something like home or household or family. There has to be some familial thing, doesn't there?
Yeah.
Well, even the Society of Jesus, which is kind of, it's a Jesuit vocabulary, but most Protestants, certainly most Protestants in my world, are completely unfamiliar with it. And
Well, I mean, we use societies all the time, and Wesley used society all the time.
but I think it has a certain currency right now.
Yeah, it does, but it doesn't mean what it meant then, which was intimate community.
Yeah, right. Well, oh, hold on, sorry. Hello? It's my wife. She just came out.
Yeah, she's the only one who's allowed to break in, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you tell her I'll call her right back? Okay, bye. Anyway, we'll have to think about that. I have to wrestle with the vocabulary, but I get that.
The thing about the vocabulary is it always manifests itself somewhere along the line in relation to familial language. So, you know, the reason that the leader of the monastic house was called abbot or abbess is because it's Abba, because it is daddy, and it's either a mummy daddy or a daddy daddy, and it's weird that Aramaic should, you know, manifest itself in amen and abbot, but you know they're the only ones that we get. But it's because the language moves from Greek oikos to Latin familia, which obviously is the language of the monastic household. It's funny how they carried on Abba, isn't it? So that it's like there's another. You see what I mean? So it's entirely appropriate to pick up some language from the past, even if it doesn't really connect, because you can reform it and relaunch.
And you can redefine it in a way.
Yeah.
In fact, in secular terms, a lot of very successful. Well, take Amazon.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a word that's been completely redefined. Who thinks of the river anymore?
Yeah. Or who thinks of it actually as women warriors.
There we go.
I think is probably the original meaning.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, the river that's named after the women, the female warriors, which is hilarious, isn't it?
Yeah. But there's a thread there of strength and power and pervasive presence.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And now we have a retailer. Yeah.
Which who knows what that is? Yeah, that's right. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And you know, I think that that kind of recapturing language and then relaunching it is a great thing to do.
Yeah.
Awesome. So helpful.
There are a couple things that are surfacing. One is, I'm just thinking about Jim. You know, I've been speaking about the language. So the language that you're using is defining a future that I feel like is worth laying my life down to join you in. You know, and even when you're at my house, I was asking more and more, like, are these timbers of language that we can really build upon? And so if you take the language, at least the way that I've been listening to you state it, you know, Jesus is the subject in a sense, is this very covenantal relationship side that would fit on that left side of the spectrum. And then taking back what hell has stolen is this very kingdom-oriented side of things on the right-hand side of that spectrum. And so I've been noticing, and then give life fits in there too. And so it does feel like there's a lot of intentionality as you've laid those things out. So I do want to speak to that. It does look like you're moving in that direction, even intuitively, as just, you know, the leader that you are. So I'm seeing all of that. In there. And so that's where I just keep pressing in. If we can have language as a movement that can last longer than a decade, it's not just flashy, not just trying to look good on letterhead, but then I think that's where Mike's getting at, honing this. Because I think the missionary home, when I read about that, I went, what the heck? Why did nobody ever tell me about this? I'd love to be a part of something like that. And, you know, I think even casting roots for change out of our historical roots and all of that, or casting vision for change out of that could be really helpful there. So, but then the other observation is just this, so in this pilot region, not only are we on the West Coast, Jim, but you've got Lloyd Moritz, who is a 3DM guy and has been through 3DM Learn, all of that stuff that Mike walked through, though, you know, neither of us could have reproduced it in that same exact way. I mean, this is the fountain we've been drinking from. Gary Davison, same thing. Ken Weidrich up in Western Canada, same kind of thing. David Wynn has a lot of this somewhere inside of him.
Right. He just says words.
Yep. And then I'm using this same type of stuff. So when I look at like, what the heck the Lord is moving together, it's not that we're just in proximity to one another, albeit varied in, you know, in vast geography on the West Coast, but the Spirit of God has been doing something in advance.
Absolutely.
For a season of time. And so, you know, as Jerry and Lloyd and I talked a little bit more, I mean, though, of course, all the ups and downs of working stuff like this out, I think that this is what we would love to do and to be a part of building. And so it's,
you know, I mean, I don't want to insert myself in on the process, but I can help you make the language mimetic. In other words, I can help you make it so that it's not only memorable, but you can use it to help people imitate behavior. So mimesis being, you know, the Greek word for imitation, that idea where language becomes mimetic. You see, so Family on Mission, it's mimetic because everybody starts using it almost straight away. One of the things that you often have to do to get it to meme is you get your message and then you reconnect it to the meta-narrative. And one of the things I've been training these guys to do is to go to portions of the meta-narrative and ask yourself a question like, well, what's the Jesus hermeneutic? How did Jesus form a family? Because of course he did. I mean, he was there to be the representative of the royal household. He's the son of heaven. He's the king here on earth. And so this is my son whom I love, with him I'm very pleased. That declaration is, this is the guy that's representing the family. And of course, he goes to his own family and they reject him, and then forms the family in Capernaum. And when his own family come to take charge of him, he says, now, who's my mother and my brother and my sisters? These are my mother and my brother. Everyone who does the will of God is my brother, my brother. And so he's forming a family. And of course, that means that we've got much more longevity in our language than something that's maybe drawn from the contemporary vocabulary. You see what I mean?
Sure, absolutely. Well, to the extent that we can tie anything to the words of Jesus or the ideas of Jesus or even the biblical narrative.
Yeah.
And give it new life, not that it needs our help, but you know what I mean. Make it accessible.
It's getting that message, connecting it to the meta-narrative. That's what creates this seedbed of mimesis. And then you kind of go, oh yeah, this, and then you try it out a few times, and when it comes back to you as an echo, you think, maybe that's it, maybe we've got it.
Yep.
Yeah, very good.
So helpful.
Well, I think Michael's trying to work out the details on me coming to your leaders gathering in New Orleans. So
yeah, I'm not sure.
Hopefully we'll get to sit down face to face sometime.
Absolutely.
Right now we've got, we're working out the details to have Mike come to the regional pastors retreat. And so Dave Van Roon and I have kind of been working that out. And so we're just kind of in the final stage.
Awesome. That would change the meeting, wouldn't it?
It really would. Yeah. So looking forward to that. And then another one of the interesting pieces is that Hondel has been in a coaching huddle with me now for the last, maybe we're 8 weeks in. So it's the earliest version of a huddle, an on-ramp huddle. And then when I was there with him in Anderson, he took me around to his church and showed me the fruit of he's like, look at this. I need you to see what your huddle is producing. It was amazing. He was so excited. And so we had conversations about how do we make huddles scalable under his, realm of responsibility. And then I was talking with Ben Schuler staying at his house too, because he was talking about not having all of the speakers for Orlando set yet. And I said, Joe Saxton would be an amazing fit. She's an incredible female communicator. She is Nigerian. She's got an amazing English accent, and she's just one of the top tier communicators today. And so to be able to potentially get Joe there at that Orlando convention, it just feels like this would be good seeds to continue to sow into the movement as a whole. So,
does she live in Nigeria or is she stateside?
She's American.
Yeah,
she's like me. She's mine and Sally's disciple. She's our daughter.
Oh, I gotcha. Yep.
She's amazing.
All right, I got it.
So
I'm very proud of her. I think she's probably the #1 female speaker in America right now in terms of who's wanted.
Joe Saxton. Okay.
Yep.
SAXTON.
Yep.
So that's it, guys. I've got 5 minutes. So if you,
I gotta fly. I gotta call my wife back. My wife's waiting. Talk about family. On mission.
Yeah, I hear you.
Michael Breen, thank you so much. Michael Guzman, thanks for building the bridge.
Yeah, you bet. Glad to do so. Mike, is there any way we can get
anytime, Michael? Feel free.
Good. Is there any way we can get access to the recording? I know that you were recording the call today, because I think it would be good to be able to break that stuff down, that spectrum and stuff.
Yeah,
Perfect.
if you go to Nancy,
Perfect.
my assistant, she'll work that out for you.
Will do. Sounds good.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
God bless.
I hope to hear the mics again soon, someday. Thank you.
Look forward to it, Jim. See ya.
See ya.